I knew I wasn't really invited. It was my mother's birthday dinner held at this ridiculously overpriced steakhouse downtown that she didn't even like. But it had valet service, crystal glasses, and lighting so dim you could almost mistake her for a movie star. That was the point. She invited the usual suspects' cousins who still called her Queen J, aunts who lived for drama, and two women I'd never seen before who were clearly there to fill chairs and praise her latest reinvention. As for me, I wasn't invited, I was expected. Same with the bill. My name's Erin, by the way. I'm 34. And that night was the last time I let them treat me like I was just a wallet with legs. I showed up late, not on purpose, but also not on purpose. When I walked in, they were already halfway through appetizers. My sister Leah barely glanced up from her phone, thumb still mid-scroll like I'd interrupted something crucial. My father, Greg, didn't even look up. And Mom? She gave me this lazy two-finger wave, like I was the valet. I took a seat at the end of the table. 12 people total. 4 I recognized. The rest? Randoms she probably handpicked for their ability to compliment her without blinking. Dinner dragged. I said almost nothing. Leah launched into this monologue about her wine lifestyle blog like it was the next Amazon, despite not making a dime off it. Dad made his usual passive-aggressive remarks whenever I brought up my company. Something about real jobs and people who don't just type all day. And Mom? She smiled like she was on a talk show, nodding at compliments, raising her glass, soaking it in. Then came the toast. Dad stood, clinked his glass. Everyone hushed like he was about to drop some Shakespearean tribute to love and longevity. He looked at Mom with this practiced smile. I expected something corny. To my beautiful wife, or to many more years? Nope. To a new beginning, he said. Starting today, we're no longer a family. It was so quiet I could hear the clink of forks dropping. At first, I thought it was a joke. Some weird metaphor about change or healing or whatever. But he wasn't kidding. People clapped. Not loud, just enough to make it real. Leah even muttered finally under her breath. I looked at Mom. She didn't seem confused or shocked. Just still. Like this had been planned. I laughed. Couldn't help it. That sort of quiet, stunned giggle that slips out when something in your brain just breaks. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the keys. The black Escalade I bought them last year. Still shiny in their driveway. I set the keys on the table. I guess you won't be needing this anymore. Dead silence. Dad's smirk vanished. Mom's wine glass hovered in midair. Leah blinked like she was buffering. I wasn't done. I pulled out my phone, opened the joint trust account I'd created to help out over the years. The one that covered their mortgage, Leah's rent, and those mysterious recurring charges labeled Wellness Retreat. Then I closed it. One tap. Zeroed out. Done. The room turned cold. Leah finally spoke. That's it? I nodded. Yeah, that's it. She laughed, sharp and fake, like she thought there was a punchline coming. There wasn't. Not this time. About 30 minutes later, I found her behind one of those tacky privacy curtains the restaurant uses to make drama look exclusive. She was on the phone, screaming. Her eyeliner was smudged. Her coat was halfway off like she'd tried to leave and forgot how. You can't do this, she snapped when she saw me. You don't know what you're doing. You're ruining everything. I didn't respond. I just left. That was the line in the sand. What they didn't know was I'd already stepped over it. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a hotel downtown and sat in the bar watching basketball I didn't care about. Phone on silent. Whiskey in hand. By the time I turned my phone back on, I had 17 missed calls. 8 from Leah, 4 from Mom. The rest? Unknown numbers, probably relatives who only remember my name when the money stops flowing. The next morning, I drove to my house, not the one I paid their bills from, the one I actually lived in, where they hadn't stepped foot in over a year ever since I stopped hosting holidays because they kept bringing Tupperware to steal leftovers. I made coffee, turned on the news. Peaceful, quiet. Then the doorbell rang. It was my cousin Rhea, full makeup, coat still buttoned. Holding a box of pastries like this was just a casual Tuesday drop by. She said she just wanted to talk, that she wasn't picking sides, that people were calling her and she needed the truth. So I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. She told me everything. Apparently, this no longer a family thing wasn't spontaneous. Dad and Mom had been planning it for weeks. They told everyone I was manipulating them, that I was financially abusive, that I used guilt to control them. They'd framed it like some grand act of reclaiming independence. They just didn't expect me to call their bluff. They thought I'd sulk, maybe storm out, maybe post a dramatic status update, but they never thought I'd actually shut the money off, or take the car back, or erase the account they depended on. Because deep down, they believed I needed them to keep playing the game, Rhea said. Mom called her around midnight in tears, not because I cut them off, but because she couldn't access one of the accounts she used to book her post-birthday spa trip. That one? Yeah. Also under my name. Oops. That alone would have been satisfying. But of course it wasn't over. 2 days later, I got served. At work. A formal lawsuit. Mom and Dad were suing me for financial abuse of elderly dependents. I almost laughed right there in the HR office. They accused me of coercion, said I exploited them through guilt and expectation. They framed every dollar I gave, every bill I paid, as blackmail. The cherry on top? Leah joined the circus. She emailed my company's general inbox with accusations of harassment, sent screenshots of texts like, "You left your charger here," said it was evidence of me obsessively monitoring her. I didn't respond, but I started gathering my own receipts, screenshots, bank records, voicemails of Mom begging for rent, drunken calls from Dad asking for help covering the second mortgage he secretly took out. For Leah's condo? Yeah, I kept everything. And just when I thought the plot had hit its peak, Rhea posted a TikTok. Just her, sitting on her bed, talking about what financial abuse really looks like. When your cousin gets cut off for no longer being the family's ATM after 10 years, it blew up. 500,000 views in 24 hours. She didn't use names, but people pieced it together. Leah's wine empire started bleeding followers. Sponsors bailed. She deleted half her content in a week. The lawsuit? Withdrawn. But the silence that followed? That was the real beginning. Because they weren't done. And neither was I. They thought silence would make me flinch, that if they just went quiet long enough, I'd start to doubt myself, maybe even apologize. But the thing about people who fake power is they never realize how much of it isn't actually theirs. I didn't wait. The car was already gone, sold within the week. But I didn't pocket the money. I used it to buy a decade-old Civic in cash, had it delivered to their driveway with a massive red bow and a card that said, "Let's see how free you really are." I never got a thank you. I never expected one, but they didn't send it back either, and that said enough. Next, I shut down the family phone plan. It used to be under my name for convenience, but now it was just leverage. Apparently, none of them realized how deeply they relied on that number. Leah lost access to every single one of her account's Instagram, business email, even her so-called blog backend. Mom couldn't get into her Gmail. Dad missed 3 golf games because nobody could reach him. 3 days later, I sent Leah an old screenshot she'd forgotten existed, a message from 2 years ago where she begged me to help her register her LLC because legal forms made her anxious. That one hit harder than expected. Then came the house, their precious 4-bedroom monument to upper-middle-class illusions. The mortgage? I'd co-signed it years ago because Dad's credit looked like a financial crime scene, and Mom swore she couldn't bear to lose the house we built memories in. I'd structured the paperwork with a clause my lawyer insisted on. If either party severed familial ties publicly, the agreement could be dissolved and repayment accelerated. The moment Dad stood up and announced the end of our family, that clause activated. The clock started ticking. 30 days, full repayment, or foreclosure. The panic didn't take long. Mom called first. Left a voicemail that started soft, then cracked halfway through. Said I was being cruel, that I was punishing them for loving me too much. I didn't reply. Then Dad showed up at my office. My assistant buzzed me, confused. Said there was a man downstairs yelling about betrayal and bloodlines. I told her to call security. As they escorted him out, he turned to the camera and flipped it off. I clipped the footage and texted it to him with the caption, "New family portrait." He didn't reply either. Leah was next. She tried to be clever. Texted from a different number like I wouldn't recognize her tone. I can't log into anything. This isn't funny. I ignored it. She tried again a day later. I have deals riding on this. Please. I sent her a link to the refund policy of a digital marketing course. No context. Just that. After that, she went quiet too. For a while, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally absorbed the message. That the air had changed enough for them to realize I wasn't bluffing. But then Rhea called again. Said she wanted to have dinner. Just her, Lily, and a few of the cousins. No drama. No surprise interventions. I hesitated, but curiosity won. When I walked in, I didn't expect what they'd prepared. A scrapbook. Not the cutesy kind with glitter and stickers. This was meticulous. Old birthday cards. Photos from when I was a kid. Notes I wrote in elementary school. Tucked between those pages were copies of emails and texts my extended family had been trading for years. Private messages warning each other about how entitled Mom had become. How Leah bragged about getting me to pay her rent without ever asking. One email from Dad literally said, "Aaron's our early retirement. They all signed the last page." A handwritten note that said they were sorry, that they saw it happening, that they didn't say anything because they were afraid to rock the boat. It didn't undo the damage, but for the first time in years, I felt something close to understood. Still, I wasn't done. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was after truth. I took every document I had, bank transfers, messages, account logins, receipts, and assembled a full report. I sent it to the IRS. No name on the envelope, just clean chronological evidence that 3 people had been living off unreported income for over a decade while claiming zero taxable revenue. Let them explain how they traveled twice a year, lived in a $500 K house, and paid no taxes. It wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. A few weeks later, the ripples started to spread. First, Mom stopped posting on Facebook. That might not sound like much, but this is a woman who used to go live to narrate herself cleaning out her spice rack. Now nothing. No vague quotes. No wine selfies. Just digital silence. Dad tried to sell the golf clubs I bought him a few birthdays ago. I know because he listed them under a burner Craigslist account and used their home Wi-Fi. My friend James, who works in cybersecurity, traced the IP address just for laughs. We spent half an hour cackling at the listing title, barely used. Great condition, no longer needed. Honestly, same. But the real shift happened on a Tuesday. Lily texted me, "Are you free tonight? There's a meeting. It's time." I had no idea what she meant. When I arrived at her apartment, I walked into something I hadn't seen since childhood unity. 10 relatives sat in her living room, all quiet, all waiting. Aunt Mia, Uncle Josh, Cousin Rachel, even Great Aunt Alma, who hadn't left her house in months. They weren't there to gossip. They were done. Apparently, after I pulled the plug, Mom and Dad panicked and started turning on everyone. They told one relative that Aunt Mia had stolen jewelry from the house, lied, told another that Uncle Josh was unstable and needed medication, tried to get Lily fired by emailing her boss, saying she was spreading family rumors online. It nearly worked. That's when the rest of them said enough. Aunt Mia had a folder, no joke, a real one with screenshots, bank statements, even copies of forged loan documents Dad used years ago in Grandpa's name. She pushed the folder toward me and said, "We want to burn them down, but clean, with proof. You know how." I didn't say yes right away. I wanted to do it right. The next morning, I called in a favor from a forensic accountant I'd worked with for a previous audit. I told her I needed full financial tracing on 20 years of questionable transactions. She didn't even blink, asked for names. When I gave them, she paused and said, "Oh, I've heard of them." Turns out my parents had tangled with someone in her firm years ago. She said she'd take the case pro bono, just for the fun of it. That's when I knew this wasn't personal anymore. It was systemic. It started with a letter, not digital, not an email, a real certified letter, sent from the IRS. Uncle Josh had a friend in the mailroom who tipped us off. It landed on their doorstep Thursday morning. By Thursday night, Mom had called half the family, sobbing about some administrative mix-up. Nobody answered. Over the weekend, she tried a soft reboot, logged into an old Instagram account, and posted a photo of a sunrise and a Bible verse. The caption said, Those who judge will be judged, Aunt Mia commented. Start packing. By the following week, Rachel had contacted the mortgage lender with the documents we found. Turns out Dad had forged 2 co-signers, one of them being Grandpa, who'd already been dead 3 years when the form was dated. The bank launched an investigation. Leah tried to stay quiet but couldn't help herself. She posted a cryptic story black screen, white font, betrayal cuts deepest when it's family. Someone screenshotted it. The comments were brutal. That was when Lily released her video, 10 minutes. No names, just a painfully honest walkthrough of what financial abuse looks like. 500,000 views in 2 days. Sponsors backed out of Leah's deals. Her inbox flooded. Someone found an old video of her laughing about how easy it was to get her big brother to pay rent without noticing. She deleted her channel by Friday. I didn't say a word online. I didn't need to. The truth was finally speaking for itself. After Leah disappeared offline, after the documents started circulating and the mortgage probe got real, the air changed. You could feel it. Not dramatic like thunder, more like when the wind shifts before a storm. People stopped pretending. Nobody called to check in. No one sent vague thinking of you texts hoping I'd offer reassurance. Instead, they waited. Like the whole family had turned into an audience at a play they couldn't admit they were part of. The funny part? I didn't care. Not anymore. The guilt they used to weaponize wasn't working. And with every silence, every absence, it got easier to breathe. Until one day, out of nowhere, Dad tried a new approach. A delivery driver showed up at my place with an envelope. No note, just my name written in his exact handwriting. Inside was a check for $10,000, along with 5 handwritten pages of what I assume was meant to be an apology. The last page wasn't even finished. Like he got tired halfway through pretending to reflect. I stared at that check for maybe a minute, tops, before folding it back up and slipping it into the folder with the rest of the evidence. Whether it was guilt or fear didn't matter. He wasn't sorry. He was just trying to beat the fallout. It didn't work. If anything, that move confirmed what I already knew. They weren't fighting back anymore. They were drowning. Aunt Mia started getting calls again, blocked numbers. Voice messages from Mom that swung between fake calm and panicked sobbing. We didn't know it would go this far, she said in one of them. We're family. You don't burn family. But that's the thing. They lit the match. I just stopped pretending it wasn't smoke. Then came the final reunion. Not a party, not a celebration. Just one long backyard table at Aunt Mia's house. She called it a gathering, but it felt more like a trial with wine. Everyone was invited, even them. I didn't think they'd show, but they did. Mom showed up in some cocktail dress like it was a gala. Leah wore sunglasses like the paparazzi were hiding behind the grill. Dad looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Nobody said a word when they arrived, just shifted in their seats like a storm cloud had entered the yard. Aunt Mia opened the conversation, no script, no hesitation, just truth. She laid out what we'd found. The documents, the lies, the years of manipulation buried under fake affection. She didn't yell. She didn't dramatize it. She just passed around the folder, one by one. Refinance forms with forged co-signers. Trust transfers. Screenshots of Mom and Leah coordinating stories to justify why they deserved more from Grandpa's estate. Nobody interrupted. Not even them. Then Rachel stood up. Quiet but steady. She read a list of every family member who'd loaned money to Mom or Dad, or been guilted into covering something over the last decade. The list took nearly 7 minutes. Nobody interrupted her either. Leah kept her sunglasses on. Mom clutched her wine glass like it was a life raft. Then Lily stood and played a voicemail. Her phone on speaker, clear as day. It was Leah talking to a friend, laughing. Aaron's just a doormat with a wallet. If he ever cuts us off, I'll cry long enough for someone else to pay the rent. The silence after that wasn't just awkward. It was surgical. No one looked at her. Not even Mom. Leah didn't defend herself. She just got up and walked to the far end of the yard, like the audio hadn't been hers. Finally, it was my turn, but I didn't make a speech. No anger, no build-up. Just a small envelope that I handed across the table. One for Mom, one for Dad. One left at Leah's empty seat. Inside, legal statements already filed, formally ending any financial, legal, or emotional obligation. They weren't just cut off, they were cut out. Mom looked at the first page and asked if I was serious. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Dad didn't ask anything, just stared at the grass like it held the answers. Leah never came back to the table. And still, no one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't a victory lap, it was closure. The kind that doesn't explode but settles into your bones. And then came the real surprise. Aunt Mia stood up and announced what she'd been quietly working on with the probate attorney. Grandpa's house, the one Mom always swore she'd inherit. The one she claimed she deserved more than anyone else, was being turned into a family trust. But with rules this time. Not for people who show up when there's money, only for those who contribute, who show up emotionally or financially or with time. No more freeloaders, no more blood is thicker excuses. It was about values now, community, healing. And Mom? She didn't qualify. Neither did Dad or Leah. For once, being family by blood wasn't enough. You had to act like it. When we started to eat, when plates were passed and people started talking again, Mom sat frozen, envelopes still unopened on the table. Dad eventually stood up, didn't say a word, and walked out through the side gate. Leah followed a few minutes later, eyes down, shoes clicking against the stone. No goodbye, no argument, just silence. And that silence said everything. I stayed, helped with cleanup, told stories I hadn't thought about in years, laughed in a way I hadn't in longer than that. And as the sun dipped below the trees, something shifted. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was peace. And peace was enough for now. Later that night, I got a message from an old friend of Leah's, someone I barely knew. Just 2 lines, she's spiraling, they all are. Just so you know, I didn't answer, didn't even open the thread. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about all of us who'd been used and bent and reshaped into something convenient. And that version of me, he was gone, replaced by someone who no longer had to choose between loyalty and survival, someone who finally chose himself. In the weeks that followed the backyard reckoning, the dust didn't exactly settle, it just shifted into new corners. They didn't reach out again, not directly. No more blocked calls, no more fake apologies taped to envelopes, but I could still feel them trying to maneuver behind the scenes, poking at loose threads to see if any part of the web would still hold. They weren't fighting for redemption. They were scrambling for survival. And it showed in all the ways they tried to rewrite history without actually saying a word. Leah deactivated every platform that had once been a stage for her curated, borrowed life. Her blog URL redirected to a broken landing page. Her business email bounced back with a generic error. A few people asked me if I knew what happened to her. I said I didn't. And even if I had, I wouldn't have answered. Because the truth was, the moment she walked out of that backyard, she stopped being someone I owed explanations to. Mom, however, couldn't help herself. She resurfaced through other people's soft entries like a relative's prayer circle or a mutual's charity auction. Always the same script, that she missed her family, that forgiveness was godly, that mistakes shouldn't define a person. What she never said was what those mistakes were. She wanted grace without confession, an apology without the uncomfortable truth. And the thing is, some people gave it to her, not many. But a few relatives with short memories and soft boundaries started testing the water. One even texted me something like, "Maybe it's time to move on. She's still your mother." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I'd already moved on. She just wasn't coming with me. But what she didn't expect, and what I knew she feared, was the second ripple effect. Because once a lie cracks in one place, it doesn't stop there. And what Mom and Dad never understood was that their mess wasn't just about me. They had spent decades building a system, a whole ecosystem of emotional IOUs and quiet manipulations that touched everyone. So when my cousins saw the fallout and realized they weren't alone in what they'd felt, they started digging too. And what they found? That's when things started to break in places I didn't even touch. Uncle Josh uncovered a temporary loan he gave Dad 7 years ago that had mysteriously turned into a permanent debt without paperwork. Aunt Carla realized Mom had been quietly using her Social Security number for a failed credit line back in 2015. No identity theft charges yet, but enough to send up red flags and freeze accounts. Cousin Ella found out she was co-signer on a private student loan Leah had taken for a nutrition certification she never even finished. The more they searched, the more rot they found. It was like termites in the foundation. Everything looked solid until you pressed on it. And once exposed to light, it collapsed fast. At one point, I got a call from James, the same cousin who'd helped trace Dad's Craigslist listing. He said, "You lit the fuse, man." But this house was already packed with dynamite, and I believed him. Because no matter how far I stepped back, it kept blowing open wider. The IRS investigation by then had moved past quiet paperwork into actual interviews. Not with me, I was clean. But I heard through Rhea that Dad had to sit down with an auditor. Apparently, he tried to charm his way through it, said he was misunderstood, said it was a few innocent oversights. But when asked why a man with no official employment for over a decade was still making payments on a premium golf club membership, he froze. The agent asked for documentation. None existed. That was the beginning of the real unraveling. By the time autumn rolled around, I barely recognized the landscape. Mom and Dad's house was up for sale, not by choice, but by court order. The mortgage acceleration clause had triggered a cascade of unpaid penalties, and once the co-sign clause was enforced, the bank didn't hesitate. The official listing didn't mention the drama, just motivated sellers and price to move. I saw the photos online. They'd staged it, of course. Neutral tones, fake plants, a cozy throw blanket draped over the couch, like it was ever a home. But I saw the ghosts in every photo: the kitchen where I signed their first check, the hallway where Leah cried after getting her first overdraft warning, the spare bedroom they made me sleep in every holiday even though I paid for the roof. It was all dressed up like nothing had happened, but everything had. I didn't go to the open house. I didn't drive by. But I did get a call from the realtor. She thought I was still a co-owner. I wasn't. Not anymore. I let her talk, listened to her pitch like I was just another buyer. And then, calmly, I told her she might want to double-check the lien disclosures. Because while I wasn't interested in buying, I'd made sure every unpaid favor had a paper trail, and that trail was public record now. Meanwhile, the rest of the family had begun to rebuild something new. Not perfect, not drama-free, but honest. The kind of honest that doesn't flinch when someone says no. Aunt Mia started hosting monthly dinners again. Not big, just enough to remind us that family can feel like safety when it's earned. Lily, who had been so quiet for most of her life, started working on a community podcast about generational abuse and financial trauma. The first episode was about guilt as currency. She didn't mention names. She didn't have to. It was already understood. As for me, I found myself doing something I hadn't in years. Resting, not just physically, mentally. I stopped checking my phone for emergencies that weren't mine. I stopped waiting for apologies I knew would never come. I picked up painting again. Just small stuff. Acrylics on canvas in my spare room. Sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, I'd pull out a half-finished piece and just let my mind slow down. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It felt earned. But even peace needs maintenance. Because trauma doesn't just leave. It lingers. Shows up when you least expect it. Like when I was grocery shopping and heard someone laugh the way Mom used to. Or when I scrolled past an old photo from Leah's birthday and felt that weird ache in my chest. The kind that whispers maybe things could have been different, but they weren't. And trying to rewrite the past only delays the present. So I honored the ache and moved through it. That's what healing looks like sometimes. Not a clean break, but a quiet decision every single day to not go back. One night, about 3 months after the reunion, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo album, old pictures, real ones, printed, not digital. Most of them were of me. Childhood birthdays, school plays, graduations, stuff I didn't even remember existing. Tucked inside the back cover was a note, in Mom's handwriting. Just 6 words, "You were the best of us." I stared at it for a long time, not angry, not sad, just still. Because by then, I understood. That wasn't an apology. That was her goodbye. And maybe, in her own twisted way, it was the best she could do. After the photo album arrived, I left it sitting on my kitchen counter for a week. I didn't open it again, didn't look through it. didn't try to decode her handwriting or wonder if it was sincere. I let it sit there like the ghost it was. A relic of a story I no longer wanted to retell. I knew what it represented. Not love, not regret. Just an echo of something that used to hold weight but now felt as light as dust. And honestly, I was tired of turning everything into meaning. Sometimes, closure isn't about getting answers. It's just about deciding to stop asking. Life didn't pause while I processed. It moved forward like it always does. I started taking longer walks, started sleeping better, started realizing that peace isn't loud, it's the absence of noise you forgot you were carrying. I stopped checking their socials, not because I wasn't curious, but because it didn't matter anymore. If they were happy, good for them. If they weren't, that wasn't my responsibility either. I'd already handed back every burden they ever draped across my shoulders. But peace, I've learned, doesn't mean immunity. It means resilience. Because when you finally take your life back, there's always someone waiting to see if you'll hand it over again. And in my case, that someone came wearing a familiar face. It was Leah. She showed up unannounced, standing outside my building with a tote bag and sunglasses. Like this was a casual visit, not an ambush. My building has a secure entry, but she waited by the mailbox, pretending to scroll through her phone until someone let her in. By the time my buzzer rang, she was already halfway up the stairs. I didn't let her in right away. I stood at the peephole for a solid 30 seconds, watching her shift her weight from foot to foot, like she wasn't sure if she was here to beg or accuse. When I finally opened the door, she smiled like nothing had happened. "Hey," she said, "like we'd just spoken yesterday." I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let her walk in. She looked around like she was trying to find proof of struggle, like she needed to confirm I wasn't thriving without her. We sat at the kitchen table, same one where Rhea told me about the lawsuit, same one where I signed the documents cutting ties. She pulled out her phone, opened a spreadsheet, and started talking numbers. Apparently, she'd been trying to rebuild her online presence, but couldn't secure any deals because her reputation was still too volatile. She said it like it was just an unfortunate market trend, not a direct consequence of her own actions. Then she asked if I'd be willing to publicly clarify some things. Said it wouldn't need to be dramatic, just a short statement that the lawsuit had been a misunderstanding, that the family issues were behind us, that we'd all moved on. I stared at her, not angry, not surprised, just hollow. Because this wasn't about healing, it was a rebrand, a marketing pitch. She wanted forgiveness in the form of a statement she could attach to a sponsorship email. I asked her why she thought I'd do that. She paused, looked down at her lap and said, "Because we're family." I think I actually smiled, not a sarcastic one, a real, tired smile. I told her I wished her well. Then I stood up and opened the front door. She didn't argue, just picked up her bag and walked out like this was the ending she'd expected all along. A few days later, the ripple reached Mom. I don't know if Leah told her what happened or if she'd been tracking my life through someone else, but out of nowhere, I got a letter in the mail. Not handwritten this time, typed, formal, like she was applying for permission to exist in my life again. She said she'd been speaking with a therapist, that she understood now how her actions may have caused harm, that she regretted the way things unfolded but hoped we could find a new path forward. She used words like reflection, restoration, and reconciliation. Big, polished words. Words that sound honest if you don't know what's hiding behind them. But I did, because tucked inside the letter was a second page, a financial breakdown, her projected expenses for the year, her estimated shortfall, and a note at the bottom asking if I'd be willing to consider a temporary stipend to help her transition into a more stable chapter. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and dropped it straight into the shredder. Not out of spite, out of clarity, because there it was, her version of healing. Process your pain, then pay me for mine. The final twist didn't come from any of them. It came from the bank. One morning, I got an alert about a flagged transaction. It was tied to the old trust account I'd shut down months ago. Somehow, someone had tried to reactivate it using an outdated login. Not smart enough to work, but sloppy enough to leave a trail. I followed it. Turns out Leah had used an old laptop that still had residual autofill data. She must have figured out the bank's backend hadn't fully deleted the inactive structure and thought she could reroute a few deposits. Maybe she figured I wasn't paying attention anymore. Maybe she thought time would have softened me. What she didn't realize was that I'd set up alerts for that very reason. I forwarded the attempted access log to my attorney. Within a week, she received a cease and desist letter and a formal warning that any further attempts would be pursued under fraud statutes. She didn't reply. She didn't try again. By that point, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not revenge, just distance. A calm, spacious kind of detachment. Like I was finally on the other side of something I'd been pushing against for years without even knowing it. It wasn't about punishing them anymore. It wasn't even about justice. It was about alignment. About making sure that the peace I'd fought for stayed intact. That it wasn't another temporary comfort waiting to be dismantled by guilt or nostalgia. I started hosting dinners of my own. Not big ones. Just a few people, once a month. Cousins, friends, neighbors. People who showed up with nothing to gain and everything to share. We'd cook, we'd talk, we'd laugh. No drama, no emotional landmines. Just real connection. Sometimes we'd talk about the past, not to dwell, just to mark how far we'd come. Other times, we didn't talk about it at all, we just lived. And in those moments, I realized something powerful. That healing isn't loud. It's not some cinematic scene with music swelling and tears falling. It's quiet. It's in the way your shoulders drop when you walk into your own home. It's in the way your phone doesn't buzz with dread anymore. It's in the way you start dreaming again. One night, after everyone had left, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. The window above the sink was open, and I could hear the wind rustling through the trees. It reminded me of something from years ago, a sound I used to notice before life got so heavy. I stood there for a long time, listening, not thinking, just being. And in that silence, I felt it. The weight finally gone. Not shifted, not redistributed, gone. And I knew, deep in my bones, that they couldn't touch me anymore. Not because I'd built walls, but because I'd built something better. A life they weren't part of and never would be again. Time moved differently after that night at the sink. It stopped feeling like something I was racing against or trying to escape from. It just was. Steady, quiet, honest. I started to realize how much of my life had been spent performing calm instead of living it. How many years I'd lost trying to buy peace through silence, trying to earn respect from people who measured worth by what I could give them, never by who I was. But now, with the noise behind me, I could finally hear myself again. Not the version of me shaped by obligation or guilt, but the one I used to catch glimpses of when I was younger. The one who liked early mornings and long drives with no destination. The one who didn't apologize for asking to be treated like a human being. One morning, I drove out to the edge of town just for the hell of it. No GPS, just instinct. I ended up at this old public park I hadn't been to in years. The kind of place we used to go as kids for 4th of July picnics before the family fractured into factions. I sat on a bench by the duck pond with a coffee in hand and watched the water ripple like it had its own story to tell. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted. I didn't feel like I was being watched or judged or secretly resented. I just felt present, whole, like I belonged to my own life again. Around the same time, Lily texted me. She was finishing up her second podcast series. The new theme was about reclaiming narratives, how people trapped in toxic families rewrite their own stories without waiting for permission. She asked if I wanted to be part of the final episode. Not as a guest, as a voice, a perspective. I hesitated at first, not because I wasn't ready, but because I wasn't sure what I had left to say. But she said something that stuck with me. She said, "You don't owe them silence anymore. You owe yourself truth." That's when I knew. This wasn't about revenge. It never really was. It was about reclaiming the power of my own name, my own memory, my own choices. So I recorded a voice memo, just a few minutes, no script, no edits. I talked about what it felt like to grow up as the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who learned to fix problems he didn't cause. I talked about what it cost me to carry their shame as if it were mine. I ended it with one sentence. Sometimes healing means walking away without looking back, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to go. The episode went live on a Tuesday. By Friday, it had over 200,000 listens. I didn't read the comments. I didn't need validation. But I did get a message from someone unexpected. Aunt Denise, the one who hadn't spoken up during the reunion but had always been kind to me when I was a kid. Her message was short. She said, "I wish I'd said something sooner. I see it now. I see you." That was all. And somehow, it meant more than any apology from Mom ever could. Months passed. The house sold. Last I heard, they moved into a rental 2 towns over. Nothing flashy. No granite countertops or double-door fridges. Just basic walls and carpet and the sound of their own echoing consequences. Leah stayed offline. Word got around that she'd taken a job at a boutique wine shop, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions about failed brands or viral scandals. Mom tried to start a new blog under a different name. It didn't last. The internet forgets fast, but not that fast. And Dad? Well, I assume he still plays golf. Just not at the club I used to pay for. They tried once more. Not together. Separately. First, Mom sent a birthday card. Not handmade, not heartfelt. Just store-bought with a single line scribbled inside. Hope life's treating you well. No return address. No apology. Just her way of trying to pretend we'd never hit detonate on the lie we used to call family. I didn't reply. Then Dad emailed me. Subject line, "Can we talk?" I read it, then archived it. I wasn't angry. I just didn't care anymore. Because some things don't need a response. Some things are better left in the inbox of the past. Eventually, the court finalized the estate redistribution. Grandpa's savings, once quietly funneled into suspicious accounts, was reassigned based on new forensic evidence. Aunt Mia now oversees the trust. It funds educational programs, caregiving support, and small grants for any relative contributing to the family's well-being in tangible ways. The rules are simple. No one is entitled to help. You earn it by showing up, by contributing, by caring, the way it should have always been. And as poetic as it sounds, I never applied. Not because I wasn't eligible, but because I didn't need it. Knowing it exists, knowing it was built from the ashes of what they tried to destroy, that was enough. One afternoon, Lily and I met for coffee. We talked about the future, about what we wanted to build. Not out of spite, out of vision. She said something that stuck with me. We didn't just survive the fire. We learned how to build with what was left. I nodded because she was right. And the more I looked around at the life I'd rebuilt, the friends who'd become family, the laughter that didn't feel borrowed, the mornings that didn't start with dread, the more I realized that this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. As I stood at the window later that evening, watching the sky shift into that kind of soft orange that only happens right before sunset, I felt it in my chest. Not a pang, not regret, just gratitude for the storm, for the silence, for the chance to begin again. And I knew without doubt that this was what freedom looked like. Not revenge, not punishment, just peace, earned, chosen. And finally, mine. Story 2. The entire family now despises me after sister claimed that I embezzled her money at the wedding. Days later, I arrived to the family meal, displayed video proof, and stunned everyone. The wedding day exceeded everyone's expectations in terms of beauty. Brian, my sister Elizabeth's now husband, looked like the happiest guy alive, and she looked stunning in her luxury gown. Everything went without a hitch. The dancing, the champagne toasts, and the vows. I didn't sense any tension if there was any. Not until the evening following the wedding, however. The family had met at my parents' place to unwind and speak about the big day. Elizabeth abruptly got up, her voice trembling as she revealed something that hit me like a truck, as we were reliving amusing memories on the dance floor. Our honeymoon funds were stolen by John. $10,000. It's gone. There was silence in the room. I sensed that everyone was staring at me. She had just uttered something that my brain was unable to comprehend. Took me. It was ridiculous. Elizabeth went on and on before I could even defend myself. She commented about how betrayed she felt, how upset she was, and how she'd been sobbing all day. Brian seemed to have been struck by a freight train as he sat still. That being said, my folks jumped right in to help her. "How could you do this, John?" With a disappointed shake of her head, my mother murmured, "Everything was damaged by you. Take something from your sister, your own sister, Dad also said. You are no longer welcome here. Speaking out, I attempted to clarify that I hadn't touched a cent. I made it clear that I didn't even know where the money was stored and that I had spent the whole night at the front desk in plain sight of everyone. To his credit, Brian expressed uncertainty, even stating, I just don't think John would do that. Elizabeth, however, would have none of it. Brian, stop protecting him. She lost her temper. He's telling lies. It's unbelievable that you choose his side over mine. You're nasty, John. Leave my eyes. I was taken aback. She was upset over more than simply the supposed theft. It was intimate. She told me that I was no longer a member of the family, and my parents agreed. My father told me that you are no longer our son. The last blow was that. I glanced at Brian, who appeared just as perplexed as I was. After that, I departed. When I was driving off, I started assembling the pieces. I understood why she was acting in this way. The money wasn't the point. It had to do with our grandmother. A few months prior, Grandma had made it plain that she wanted to give me the majority of her estate. She thought I would manage it well and look after the family. Legacy. The self-described golden child, Elizabeth, was incensed. She had tried to convince Grandma that she deserved the money instead. However, it had failed. Grandma's health was deteriorating now, and Elizabeth was desperate to paint me as the villain. She did it to undermine me. I was upset. I knew, however, that this was not the end. If she intended to act immorally, I could play more soiled. I had a personal secret. To keep Brian safe, I had retained one. For months, Elizabeth had been unfaithful to him. I didn't intend to reveal her. All bets were off, though, after what she had done. I started to plot my retaliation. I kept thinking about what Elizabeth had done after that night. The fact that my parents blindly trusted her was much more painful than the betrayal itself. I couldn't even look at my phone because the family group chat exploded with texts about how I had let everyone down and how ashamed they were of me. It was as if Elizabeth had thrown a switch, and now I was the family evil, but I wasn't going to let her win. Elizabeth felt she could ruin me and go away untouched. What she didn't know was that I had been sitting on a bombshell for months. Back in August, I'd accidentally caught her with someone who wasn't Brian. I'd gone to a coffee shop in the next town to meet a buddy, and there she was, seated in a corner booth, holding hands with some guy I didn't recognize. They weren't exactly subtle kissing, laughing, acting like a full-fledged couple. Since it was really none of my concern, I remained silent at the time. I anticipated it would come back to bite her eventually. I simply never thought I would have to retaliate. I needed evidence now, something substantial, something that cannot be denied. I was familiar enough with her routine. Every time she vanished for a few hours every week, she would always say she was going to see a friend or doing errands. Her true intentions were obvious to anyone who wasn't a genius. Around 7 p.m. on Thursday was my best estimate. Her typical window appeared to be that one. In order to wait, I parked my car across the street from her residence. Elizabeth did indeed leave, get into her car, and drive off just after 6:45. I followed her, keeping a good distance so she wouldn't notice. I had previously seen her at the same coffee shop. In the parking lot, the man was waiting for her. I parked across the street inconspicuously and began to record. They gave each other hugs. They then shared a kiss. Not a fast kiss, either. It was evident from this type of kiss that Brian was not even on her mind. They appeared to be on a romantic date when they entered and sat near the window. The man continued to lean near to her, speaking in her ear and patting her arm. Elizabeth made it up. I captured the entire event on tape. This 7-minute golden film would completely change the course of events. Before they got into separate cars and drove off, I made sure to have a second embrace from them until they eventually departed. I waited till she was well gone before I drove home. All the way home, my heart was racing, but it wasn't from anxiety, rather, it was from anticipation. Though I wasn't going to jump right in, I knew I had something that would break her flawless little facade. I needed to hold off until the right time. Elizabeth had gone nuclear on me during a family function, so it was only appropriate that I return the favor. A few days later, I made the decision to arrange a meal and act like I was sorry and wanted to make things right. Reluctantly, my parents, still upset with me, agreed. Elizabeth accepted without hesitation. She probably thought it would be an opportunity to further embarrass me. She had no idea what was about to happen. The days before the meal were agonizing. Elizabeth kept making fun of the fact that some individuals are incapable of accepting responsibility for their acts in the family group chat, but I said nothing at all. Naturally, my parents were heated. They always said something like, "We are so proud of you, Elizabeth, for handling this with grace," whenever I saw a text message appear. Despite my need to yell, I refrained. I was certain it would be worthwhile. I texted Brian and everyone else in the family group chat the morning of the meal. To set the record straight, I suggested we get together for supper. I need to apologize, especially to you, Brian, and I owe everyone an explanation for what I wrote. My mother was the first to respond, stating that they would be present, but that I needed to have a very strong justification for my actions. Elizabeth added sarcastically that she hoped I was prepared to come clean. Brian's answer was succinct and uninteresting. "It's just a thumbs up." Excellent. Everything was coming together. I prepared myself all day. I made sure the movie was of high quality by loading it into my laptop and testing it. In case someone tried to accuse me of fabricating the video, I also printed out screenshots. I felt as though I was entering a war and was prepared to prevail when I got to my parents' place for supper. When I stepped in, the mood was strained. Elizabeth sat at the head of the table, looking as arrogant as usual, and my parents hardly recognized me. Brian was next to her, silent and restrained as he had been since the allegation. He was obviously keeping his opinions to himself, but I wasn't sure if he felt I had taken the money. I started by taking a deep breath when we had all sat down. I want to start by expressing my regret for the outcome. I understand why all of you are upset with me. However, after considering all that has transpired, I've come to the realization that I ought to have said anything sooner. I've been keeping something from you. Elizabeth's eyes gleamed with eagerness as she leaned forward a little. It's likely that she assumed I would confess. My parents simply looked with anticipation. Brian seemed uneasy. I took up my laptop, set it on the table, and opened the video file. "Watching what you're about to see is not easy," I said. "However, I believe that the truth should be known by everybody." I hit play, and for the first time, Elizabeth's arrogant attitude wavered. As the video started, there was silence in the room. It shows her approaching and embracing and hugging the man in the coffee shop parking lot. It was the coffee shop date. The way they couldn't keep their hands off each other. Before they drove off, the final shot showed them embracing once more in the parking lot. For a few seconds after the video concluded, nobody spoke. Then Brian said something. "Who the devil is that?" His voice was stern as he inquired. Elizabeth's cheeks turned red. Her lips opened to speak, but nothing came out. "Answer him," I said. "I was accused of stealing by you, of shattering this family." "When you were the one lying all along, I take it that this is not your friend? For what duration has this been occurring?" Brian didn't wait for Elizabeth to respond, even though she stumbled. He pulled his chair back and got to his feet, his expression a combination of fury and astonishment. "You have been unfaithful to me," he replied. "I was trying so hard to provide you the life you want the entire time. The vehicle, the Maldives, everything. For this, my parents looked like they'd been struck by a vehicle." My mother turned to Elizabeth, her voice cracking. "Is this accurate, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth was able to speak at last. She said, "It's not what it looks like, but nobody took her seriously." "This will teach you a lesson, Elizabeth," I replied as I got to my feet. "This conflict was begun by you. I just completed it." Without saying another word, Brian picked up his keys and walked out. Still in astonishment, "My parents betrayed me. How could you harm her like this?" my dad said. "Me?" I fired back. "She made me appear terrible by accusing me of stealing $10,000. And since I said the truth, I'm the villain. Asking her how far she will go to hide her falsehoods is a good idea." I didn't hold out for a response. I gathered my belongings and departed. I wasn't going to stay to listen to any more justifications. They had the villain they had been waiting for. It wasn't me, though, this time. I didn't hear from my relatives for days after the supper. No phone calls, no texts, and no efforts at apology or explanation. Radio silence prevailed. I imagined they were probably attempting to clean up the mess Elizabeth had caused. Not even the family was the first to get in touch. Brian was the one. 2 days after the meal, he called, and to be honest, I was taken aback by his want to speak. He didn't sound angry at all, which surprised me because I thought he could be upset with me for blindsiding him in that way. He said, "I just wanted to say thank you for being honest. I'm pleased, I know, but I wish it hadn't come to this." After a lengthy conversation, he informed me that he had already begun the process of moving out of the house. He told Elizabeth. He said that he had stopped paying for the automobile he had planned to buy her and canceled their Maldivian vacation. She is now capable of managing her own life, he said. After the dinner, I asked him if Elizabeth had made an effort to speak with him. He stated, "She's been blowing up my phone, pleading with me to understand. However, there is nothing to comprehend. She cheated. The narrative is over." There was a strange feeling of finality in hearing him say that. In this whole chaos, at least one person was seeing things clearly. My mother finally got in touch with me a few days later. She wrote me a lengthy, remorseful text message in which she expressed her disappointment at me for destroying Elizabeth's relationship and emphasized the need of family support in all circumstances. I took some time to look over the message, attempting to determine whether it was worth answering at all. Ultimately, I responded with a brief message. Family members help one another by speaking the truth, not by hiding lies. Perhaps you ought to consider it. That didn't go over well. In a follow-up message, my father told me that I was acting immaturely and that, despite everything she had done, Elizabeth was still their little daughter. It was absurd. Because she was their favorite, they were prepared to ignore her deceit and manipulation. Elizabeth, however, said nothing. She said nothing. In any case, I didn't care if she was preparing her next move or if she was too embarrassed to talk. She had lost her free vacation to the Maldives, her fiancé, and very likely the compassion she had received from my parents. I still had the uneasy feeling that this was not the end of it. Elizabeth was not the kind to concede. She must have been planning if she was silent. I wasn't mistaken either. She took action a week later. One morning, my extended family and common acquaintances bombarded me with SMS Elizabeth, apparently started spreading a rumor that I had set her up to undermine her relationship and wreck her wedding. She said that the video was only a last-ditch effort to get revenge on her for disclosing the purported theft, and that I had been pursuing her for weeks in an effort to catch her slipping. The damage was done, but it was ridiculous. Some individuals, particularly those who were unaware of the full event, bought her narrative. They began contacting me, accusing me of being nasty and petty. Fortunately, some people were able to see through her deception and told me they trusted me, but I wasn't willing to let them dictate the story. I had the video, the screenshots, the words, and all the proof. I was prepared for a public altercation if she so desired. But before I could do anything, unexpectedly, something occurred. Brian stepped in. He answered everything in a lengthy social media post. He described the meal, the charges, the cheating, and even my part in bringing the truth to light. Our relationship wasn't ruined by John. Elizabeth accomplished that on her own, he wrote. I only needed to see what he showed me. If anyone is having issues with him, talk to me about it. Among our relatives and friends, the post went viral. Overnight, it shut off the majority of Elizabeth's supporters. People began contacting me to express their regret for making snap judgments. My parents also fell silent for a while, perhaps recognizing how foolish it was of them to support her so naively. But she doubled down, Elizabeth. Things would go to a whole new level with her next action. Elizabeth's next action was both audacious and foolish. She attempted to sue me for defamation. Yes, you read correctly. She actually engaged legal counsel and sued me, alleging that I had purposefully damaged her reputation and upset her. I was torn between laughing and being upset when the documents were shown to me. She wasn't only in need, she had hallucinations. I wasted no time at all. When I showed my own lawyer the video, the messages, and Brian's social media post, they indicated right away that I shouldn't be concerned. This is a scare tactic, they informed me. However, we will appear in court if she desires to do so. And so we did. A month or so later was the court date. Most of the relatives turned up. Out of morbid curiosity, most likely. Brian was also present. Quietly seated at the rear, Elizabeth showed up with her attorney, looking self-satisfied and assured, as though she had already won. It did not impress the judge. Her attorney claimed that Elizabeth lost her relationship and social status as a result of my nefarious recording and distribution of her private video. However, my attorney quickly put an end to that. They drew attention to the fact that the video was shot in a public setting and displayed conduct that was in stark contrast to Elizabeth's earlier charges against me. They also brought up the fact that, prior to Elizabeth's deceptions bringing the matter to the public's attention, I had only shared the film to our immediate family. The finest part came next. Brian took the stand. In his testimony, he said that Elizabeth had attempted to distance me from the family by falsely accusing me of stealing. He attested that the only way he had discovered the truth about her infidelity was through the video. He said that John had not ruined anything. He prevented me from squandering my life on a person who didn't value our relationship or me. When Elizabeth's attorney attempted to cross-examine him, Brian remained unfazed. He made no allowances for interpretation and kept to the facts. Elizabeth's story fell apart when it came time for her to testify. She repeatedly contradicted herself, saying that the man on the video was only a friend at one moment and that she and Brian were out on a break at another. None of it was convincing to the judge. It was evident where things were going by the end of the hearing. The court dismissed the complaint, finding that my testimony was significant and genuine, and that I had not defamed Elizabeth. The judge's stern reprimand of Elizabeth, however, was the true kicker. "You have squandered the time of this court with unfounded charges," she remarked. "It is evident that your lawsuit was an attempt to escape accountability for your own acts. I implore you to consider the choices that brought you to this point." Elizabeth sobbed as she walked out of the courtroom. Then the roles were reversed. Nobody, not our extended family, not my parents. Her falsehoods would not even be tolerated by her closest friends. Brian cut off all communication and completed the process of moving out. After feeling humiliated and ashamed, my parents eventually acknowledged that they had made a mistake by siding with her. It was a silent acknowledgement rather than a spectacular apology. "We made a mistake," my father told me over the phone one evening. "I hope one day you can forgive us." I truly meant it when I told him I would give it some thought. It was not going to be simple to forgive, after everything I endured at their hands. Elizabeth, on the other hand, vanished entirely from the family scene. A few weeks later, she relocated out of state, saying she needed a new beginning. I've heard that she has had trouble finding friends or a job ever since. As was to be expected, her notoriety followed her. I won't pretend that I'm not scarred by this entire experience. It has. However, the truth ultimately won out, and I was at last free of the cloud. I had been hung over by Elizabeth. I have no regrets about revealing her. She paid the price for starting the conflict. Story 3, my dad said at Thanksgiving that we would no longer be watching your children. "Really?" I responded. After that, I quit fixing your house and went out. My phone burst the following day. Thanksgiving was meant to be a time for relaxation, delicious food, and family. Rather, it became a catastrophe. My parents' new home, which I had been renovating for them for the past 2 months, was where we were all assembled. I had agreed to do it when they asked me to. Electrical work, repainting, plumbing repairs, and new flooring. I spent every free hour there, sweating and coated in dust, making sure everything was just so. They waited for the house to be ready while sitting comfortably in their flat. I didn't voice any complaints. They were my parents, it was only natural to assist them. I had only asked for one thing in exchange: occasional childcare. Not every day, not every weekend even. Right when I needed it. I was trying my best to raise my kids by myself after my wife passed away a few years ago. However, I occasionally required assistance. They had always agreed with me that it made sense. We were eating dinner that evening when my dad said, "We're not going to babysit your kids anymore," setting down his fork. His expression was serious, but at first I assumed he was kidding. There was silence at the table. Then he went on. He said that my kids were too much and that they were exhausted. And then came the worst part. He said they were like my sister's kids. He praised their good behavior. How peaceful, how easy, apparently not like mine. I turned to face my sister. She remained silent, simply grinning while sitting there. Something twisted inside of me. I had fixed up her house for free for 2 months. No effort has ever been required on their part. They were now accusing me of being a burden to them because of my children, because they fell short of my sister's standards. I inhaled deeply and made an effort to remain composed. I said, "Really? I'll cease repairing your house after that. Quiet." My father simply looked at me as though I had hit him. My mother intervened and attempted to mediate the situation. She began by saying that I was unaware of how difficult it was for them and how much they had done for me. Although I had barely asked them for anything, she gave the impression that I was making them perform unpaid labor. Before I could answer, other family members also raised their voices. It was disliked by them. One of my aunts remarked it was crazy to talk about my children like that, especially in front of them. My sister remained mute as another uncle emphasized how much I had already done for my parents and how I had essentially saved them thousands of dollars on repairs, simply taking in the compliments on her flawless children while sitting there. I got to my feet. I responded, "Thank you for a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner. I truly appreciate everything." Then I turned to my kids and announced our departure. A table was filled with shocked glances as we picked up our jackets and made our way to the car. My kids questioned me that night why their grandparents had said those things and why they were constantly comparing themselves to their cousins. I massaged my face and moaned. Grandparents aren't always the kindest people, and the world isn't always fair. They stared at me, anticipating more. I thus made sure to mention the most crucial point. But above everything, I adore you both. I was worn out when I went to bed. It ached even though I had no regrets. I discovered 52 missed calls from my parents when I woke up the next morning. I initially believed that a horrible incident had occurred. I felt sick to my stomach. I contacted my mother back right away, partly expecting to hear about an emergency. Rather, she began talking as soon as she picked it up, as though I had personally set her house on fire. "You must come over immediately, John." I scowled. "Why? What took place?" She continued to demand that I come over while sidestepping the subject. To his agitated yet composed tone, my dad picked up the phone. "We need to discuss, John, so please come." I wasn't a moron. I understood precisely what this was about, but I also knew I had to go anyhow. I didn't want to leave my kids' belongings behind, so I kept some of them at their house. I informed them that I would arrive in an hour. The moment I entered their flat, the fact that things had not cooled down overnight was evident to me right away. My mother was pacing. My dad was standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed, and my sister, who had evidently chosen to get even more engaged, was seated on the couch like she was judging a presidential discussion. As soon as I closed the door behind me, it started. My mom jumped in first. "You overreacted, don't you think, John?" I overreacted and stared at her. My father went right in. "We apologize if we offended you, but you cannot just refuse to complete the house because of this." It nearly made me chuckle. It was there. That was the main point of this. The family, no. Not the children, only the home. I gave a headshake. "So, let me clarify this. You claim that my children are too much for you and label them a burden. In front of everyone, compare them to my sister's children. At this point, I refuse to perform the task you requested of me in exchange for free. What's the issue?" As though I had just badly hurt her, my mother put her palm to her chest. "John, that's unfair. For you, we have accomplished a lot. For years, we looked after your children." My sister eventually spoke out. "You definitely shouldn't compare the children in that way, parents." For the first time, my parents truly seemed astonished. My mother gave her a blink. "Do you not believe that we were correct?" My sister gave a shrug. "Being correct isn't the point. It was simply inappropriate for you to say that in front of the children. It's not acceptable." To be honest, I didn't think she would say that. She wasn't taking her side, but she wasn't exactly standing up for me either. But my dad turned back to me, refusing to back down. "We simply want this to end, John. You won't interrupt us over anything so trivial." As he regarded me, I gave him a death stare. As though I had threatened to place her in a nursing home, my mother gasped. My father began to continue, but I stopped him. After getting my children's clothes from the closet, I made my way out the door. My mother mentioned it at that point. "You're being self-centered, John." I paused. "I am self-centered." Following 2 months of unpaid work, after going above and beyond to assist them, I turned around after never complained about how often they required anything from me. Selfish. You want me to work on your property, but you won't even look after your own grandchildren? You want my energy, time, and effort, but the moment I need anything, you can't handle it. My mother opened her mouth to respond. However, I was finished. You are no longer required to watch the kids, but I don't have to fix your house either. After that, I left, and it was only the start. Over the following few weeks, the situation worsened. They first attempted to force me to return. They then attempted to blame me. They then pleaded since they were now facing a serious issue and it would be very expensive for them to hire experts, and they grew more frantic the longer I ignored them. But then, just when I thought they couldn't get any more devious, something else happened, and everything was altered. For the first 2 days following that argument, I ignored their calls. They sent an SMS. I didn't pay attention to those two. Then began the guilt tripping. My mother tried the traditional first. We're becoming old, John. We won't be around forever. Talk. My dad then sent me a lengthy letter about my devotion to my family and how I was acting irrationally because of a minor miscommunication. My sister, however, was largely silent. At least she had raised her voice throughout the debate, even if I assumed she was attempting to avoid getting involved. A week or so after Thanksgiving, the first received a message from my dad that truly made me chuckle. John, we forgive you. Could you come this weekend to finish the house? Pardon me. I didn't respond at all. That's when they altered strategy. They initially attempted to bribe me. My mother phoned and stated that if I finished the home, they would resume babysitting. No, I told her. My dad then contacted me to say that if I came over to sort things out, they could consider assisting with the kids. No, I told him. My sister was then assigned to try. When she contacted me one evening, she asked about the kids and struck up a conversation. You know, she added nonchalantly, perhaps you should just finish the house. They're being obstinate, but it's usually simpler if you simply get it done. I chuckled. I work for free, and they make fun of my children in exchange. And you believe I'm the one who should back down? She paused. John, it's their place after all. Simply put, they are set in their ways. You are aware of their nature. Yes, I do. I am not doing it because of this. She let out a sigh. Look, I understand it, okay? However, they will never acknowledge their mistakes. Some parents have struck me. She was aware that they were mistaken. She wasn't denying it at all. She was aware, however, that they would never say it out. I hung up after telling her I had to leave. I considered everything that evening, about how I had been helping them for years without expecting anything in return, how they never truly thanked me, and how they behaved as though it was my responsibility to assist them, but a hassle to assist me. And I concluded that I was finished. I banned their numbers that evening. My sister unexpectedly arrived at my residence 2 days later. She was standing there looking uneasy as I opened the door. We must speak, she said. I opened the door for her. She took a seat at my kitchen table and spent a minute simply looking at me. Then she let out a sigh. They gave the contractor a call. That caught me off guard. Excellent. They were able to get someone to do it at last. She grimaced. Yes, but something is wrong. I waited. They were defrauded. I blinked. What? She gave a nod. Because he was less expensive than a legitimate business, Dad hired a man from Facebook. I paid him up front, and he's already left. Took the cash and vanished. I was unable to resist. I chuckled. My sister looked at me. They lost $10,000, John. The first ceased to laugh. $10,000. Hold on. How did they manage to obtain that much money? She claimed that some of it was borrowed from relatives. I was surprised by that portion. Who? She paused. Then she spoke. Linda with Uncle Mark. Grandma, too. I took a seat. To avoid acknowledging that they needed me, they had taken out loans from several other sources. And now, they had a half-finished house and $10,000 in debt. I gave a head shake. I have no problem with it. Slowly, my sister nodded. I informed them that I knew. I paused at it. What are you? She let out a sigh. I informed them that for the first time in this whole fiasco, they should have just apologized to you for what they had done to themselves. I sensed a change. My sister, their fave. In fact, their golden child had defended me. She bent over. They're desperate, John. They'd like you to return. They recognize they made a mistake, yet they are still being obstinate. When I folded my arms, she shrugged. And you ought to force them to beg, in my opinion. I was confused when I heard my sister mention that. The favorite had always been her, the one they supported and defended. She was now asking me to force them to beg. I arched an eyebrow. Accomplish you believe they'll actually accomplish that? She smiled half-heartedly at me. They have no other option. I felt in control for the first time in a very long time. I reclined in my seat. So what precisely do they want from me? She let out a sigh. They'd like you to stop by and chat. I chuckled. I have heard that before, yes. She gave a nod. I am aware. However, they are not in charge this time. You are. She was also correct. That day, I did not go, nor did I go the next day. I let them to perspire and sit in their mess. A few days later, my mom broke. She texted, rambling and lengthy. Half excuse, half apology. She acknowledged that they could have been unjust and that their statements were inappropriate. But the most hilarious part, we ought to have acted differently. However, I did overreact, and so did you. I genuinely laughed when I read that. They had to assign some blame even in their moments of desperation. I didn't pay attention to the message. My dad then made an attempt. He was shorter. We need you, John. Return and complete the home. We'll work everything else out later. Don't apologize. Just, you must be ignored. My sister phoned me the next evening. All right. I believe they're breaking this time, she said. What took place? They asked me to apologize to you. I blinked. Hold on, did they say that? She paused. They told me to inform you, though. I sighed, but not quite in those terms. Near enough. Then she made a statement that caught me off guard. They inquired as to whether I believed you would ever talk to them again. I paused at it. I realized for the first time that they were truly afraid. Their concerns extended beyond the house. They were concerned that I had been pushed too far. They had, to be honest. I consented to see them. I wanted to hear it from them, but not because I wanted to. I promised to visit my sister, but on my conditions. They appeared different as I entered their flat, less confident, more anxious. My mother had been in tears. My father seemed worn out. I crossed my arms, took a seat, and waited. My dad sighed at last. We botched up, John. That was as near as I was going to go to a real apology. He went on about how they didn't intend to injure me, that they were upset, fatigued, stressed that the home had become oppressive, that they uttered inappropriate things. Then, at last, my mother spoke. She said quietly, "Both you and the children are loved." And I believed her for the first time. I gave them a minute to sit in the quiet. "I'm not going to finish your house," I said. As if I had smacked her, my mother gasped. My father stiffened. "John," I interrupted him. "I gave you 2 months of free work. When you needed assistance, you had it. And you didn't like the one thing I asked for in return. I'm finished now. I'm no longer upset, but I'm not going to fix your house. Keep quiet." Despite her apparent desire to argue, my mother refrained from doing so. The table caught my dad's attention. My sister. She did nothing except observe. Then I got to my feet. However, if you stop acting as like I owe you something, I'm ready to move on. If you don't treat my children as inferior to my sisters, and if you realize that going forward I will only assist you because I want to, not because you anticipate it. With nothing else to do, they nodded. I knew I had one when I left that day. And I felt free for the first time in a long time. Following that meeting, everything was miraculously resolved. I wasn't foolish enough to believe that my parents wouldn't attempt to push boundaries again, and they weren't suddenly better people. However, something had changed. They were now aware that I would no longer serve as their safety net, backup plan, or handyman. They were aware that I was prepared to go. They were frightened by that. There was silence for several weeks. No pointless phone calls. Don't feel guilty. Nothing but quiet. It was nearly quiet. Then my mother texted me one day. "This weekend, may we bring the kids? They are missed." I spent some time looking at the text. This was the same woman who had termed her a burden. In front of them, the same person who had likened them to my sister's kids. She missed them all of a sudden. Though I attempted to dismiss it, my kids sprang to mind. "Do you want to go?" I asked her. They paused. Then, my youngest appeared unsure. My eldest. Emily folded her arms. "Will they act strangely once more?" I told the truth. Perhaps they considered it. Emily shrugged after that. I suppose we may leave, I quickly replied as a result. Yes. At 5, I'll drop her off. My parents had changed by the time I dropped her off that weekend. My mother was too kind, like she was trying too hard to prove she wasn't the bad guy. My father was silent, just long enough to ensure my children were comfortable. I lingered for a few minutes. My dad then pulled me aside before I left. "John, we adore them," he remarked. "We simply made a mistake." Although it wasn't a complete apology, it was for my dad. I would never come so near again. I simply nodded. "Excellent. Don't make a mistake again." I received a call from my sister later that evening. "I must share something with you," I said. She said. It seemed serious to me in her voice. "What is it?" She let out a sigh. "The other day, Mom explained to me why she had quit babysitting. They were exhausted, so I sat up. Correct?" She paused. "No, that wasn't it," she said. "Not the entire reason anyhow." I scowled. "Then what was it?" She inhaled deeply. "John, you were envious." I blinked. "Feeling envious? Of what?" She paused. "Of you? How much your family supported you throughout Thanksgiving, about your closeness to your kids, about how they're accustomed to me being the center of attention, and now you're the one. That really caught me off guard. That isn't even logical. They are affected by it," I said. She said, "You felt like you lost control, as though you were viewed as the responsible and good son, and that enrages them." As I sat there, I tried to think about this. My parents weren't just bored of babysitting. Their feelings were resentful that I was a decent dad. It was insane. It was depressing. And it just gave me one piece of confirmation. There was no genuine chance that they would change. I kept my sister's words from my parents. Nothing would have changed as a result. However, I did treat them differently. Everything was on my terms after that. Only if my kids wanted to see the kids when they wanted to, they had to ask, not assume, if they needed my assistance with anything. If they ever treat my kids disrespectfully again. That was it. No second chances. What's the best part? They realized, for the first time in my life, I wasn't simply their son. They had to show respect for me, and that was worth everything. Things remained cordial for a time. My parents behaved themselves well. They did not press. I wasn't guilted by them. Additionally, they stopped asking me for household assistance. It was almost as if they had finally learned until they hadn't. My aunt nicknamed me John one Sunday afternoon. "Have you seen your mother's Facebook post?" It was never pleasant to hear that line. My mother posted a lengthy, dramatic message on the app about how families should always support one another and how some people lose sight of their roots. It's heartbreaking to watch our own son abandon us after everything we've done. Everyone understood who she was referring to, even though she didn't use my name. What's the best part? At least we still have our amazing daughter who never left us, she said. That was it. At that point, I was finished. I didn't text her. I didn't give her a call. I commented immediately on the post. "Mom, you're correct. Families should aid each other. I fixed your house for free for 2 months while you sat in your apartment because of this. I didn't ask for anything in return because of this, unless you show my children any fundamental decency. And I knew you didn't want family when you likened them to my sister's kids and labeled them a burden. You're looking for servants. Additionally, I no longer perform that role. I watched as the floodgates opened when I pushed send. My uncle made the first remark. Whoa, the entire story was unknown to me. This is a mess. My Aunt John is correct then. You exploited him. You got everything from him. And in return, you insulted his kids. Incredibly so. Then they borrowed money from my granny. You informed me that John wouldn't help you, therefore you needed the money. You never explained why, though. I can see the reality now. My side was taken by comment after comment. Then my sister gave me the greatest one. John is being honest, but I still adore my parents. He had every right to leave my golden sister, who they have always backed and cherished, even if she didn't stand up for them, since they treated him unfairly. I witnessed in real time as my parents' reputations fell apart. The post was then removed an hour or so later. When my mother called, I didn't pick up. Then she sent an SMS. Did you need to do that? I answered. Was your mail necessary? Quiet. My father eventually caved in a few days later. He sent a message. We were mistaken. We apologize. No justifications. Not at fault. only those words. To be honest, I didn't require anything more. I never did any further work on their house. They had to pay full price to recruit someone. I will never again allow them to guilt me into anything. They didn't have to ask to visit my kids. If they did, it was because my kids wanted to see them. And the most significant alteration? They realized that comparing my children to my sister's children would be their final encounter with her. So they never, ever did so again. For the first time, they understood that I had put them in their proper position. I had one.